Hey fellow musicians and audio engineers, Vane here. Have you ever tried to record a bass player, or do you have a bass player in your band that recorded and his sound was just dull and unintelligible? Then your bass player probably suffers from something I like to call CANS syndrome. That's short for cannot afford new strings. Well, most bass players will give you some kind of lame excuse that their old strings are pretty cool for their sound or anything like that. But in reality, they probably just can't afford them. When I was a kid, I used to hate changing the strings on my bass guitar. I mean, it cost me a lot of money, it took a lot of time. The sound of the new strings was just metally and clangy and I didn't like it at all. And on top of that, it was very, very hard to keep them in tune. Sure, it costs a lot of money, it costs quite some time to change the strings, but you'll get proficient at that. The same goes for the tuning. You just have to stretch your strings, and once you get adjusted to that, it's not a big problem anymore. But then the clanky noise. I mean, it sounds horrible, right? But that's actually the main reason why you need to change your strings. This clanking noise is actually coming from all the overtones that are being created by the fresh strings. This is something that older strings tend to lose. And these overtones are actually really important for your bass to cut through a really dense metal mix to make it intelligible. But also it's really important for the way it will excite your overdrive or even distortion if you're using that in your sound. So generally, the brighter your strings sound, the better they're gonna cut through the mix. I personally like to use Dadaya Pro Steel strings because they sound really, really bright and I really love the sound they got. But depending on what brand you prefer, you can just try and find the brightest ones and go with that. In general, the really fresh brightness you get from new strings will only last for about 2 to 8 hours, depending on how brutally you are massacring your guitar strings while playing. So you need to make sure you adjust your budget depending on how long and how many songs you need to record and how good the person is that's gonna play all the bass parts. So if your bass player says something like,
dude, I only need to provide the low end for the music, so I don't need new strings.
And you agree with this guy, then I suggest you fire your bass player and buy a mini fridge instead, because that makes a low humming noise and
it keeps your beer cold.
So what I'd like to do now is show you guys a few examples of old bass strings versus new bass strings. In one example, the bass strings were over 4 months old. In the other one, I guess it was after 4 hours of rigorous playing on new strings. And even there the tone died. So you can hear the difference and judge for yourself whether your bass player needs to shell out the money or not. Just want to let you guys hear what even 2 hours of playing can do to your string tone. First I'll let you hear the new strings, or well, recently new. And then after 2 hours of vigorous playing, here is what it ended up like. So it's not that terrible, but can you imagine what a few more hours or even days can do to your bass tone? It just loses all that sparkly, lovely sound that we need in our mixes. So while you guys watch some footage of me changing my strings on my bass guitar, I just like to leave you guys with some tips for keeping your strings fresh, but also on just generally changing your strings. So always use a spinner or some sort. You got fancy electrical ones, but you got also these hand things that I use. If you try and turn the knobs with just your hands, you're gonna go mental after changing your strings for 5 times during the recording of one album, so I won't suggest doing that. Also, you can shorten your strings if you like, or maybe just wrap them around the pin before you start turning your knobs. Always stretch your strings after you put them on until the tuning is stable. So you'll probably see me doing that in a bit. And you might need to do it about 4 or 5 times, maybe even more, depending on your bass. Always use alcohol to clean your hands or put on gloves when changing strings. Use alcohol to clean your hands before playing the bass, before recording. And if you don't have any alcohol, you can clean them with soap, and just make sure you dry them properly. Because if all the nasty stuff in your hands get on the strings, on the new strings, or if water gets on it, they won't last as long. So just make sure you do that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this video will help you convince your bass player, or maybe if that's you to purchase new strings before you head into the studio, and just make sure your bass is sounding as great as possibly can. I will upload more videos every 2 weeks, so look out for that. If you have any questions or I don't know, whatever, don't forget to comment and like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.